Is this some kind of joke? The words, sharp and laced with disdain, cut through the dry California air. Security Forces Officer Miller adjusted her mirrored sunglasses, her gaze sweeping over the old faded sedan that was wholly out of place at the VIP entrance to Vandenberg Space Force Base. At the wheel sat a man who seemed to have driven straight out of a history book. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his hair a wisp of silver, and his hands resting calmly on the steering wheel were spotted with age. "Sir, this is the VIP entrance for the Odyssey 7 launch," Miller continued, her voice amplifying the manufactured patience of someone who had no time for this. Her partner, a younger officer named Davis, shifted his weight, looking from the old man to the gleaming launch tower that pierced the sky miles away. "Your invitation and identification, please." The old man didn't speak. He simply reached over to the passenger seat and picked up a worn leather satchel. From it, he produced an equally worn wallet. His movements were slow, deliberate, unhurried by the officer's abrasive tone. He handed her a military ID card, its lamination clouded and peeling at the edges. Miller took it with 2 fingers, a frown pinching her lips. She stared at the faded photograph, the antiquated typeface. "Arthur Vance, Colonel." She read the name with a note of theatrical disbelief. She looked from the card to the man, then back again. "This is expired, by about 40 years. She wasn't wrong. The card was from a different era, a relic of a military that existed long before the sleek Delta Wing insignia of the Space Force sewn onto her own uniform. To her, it was a meaningless artifact presented by a confused senior citizen who had likely taken a wrong turn. "Look, Grandpa," she said, her condescending tone hardening into a command. "I don't know what you're trying to pull, but this launch is a Tier 1 security event. I need you to turn this vehicle around and exit the base." Now, Arthur Vance said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on the distant rocket, a silver needle against the brilliant blue canvas of the sky. He seemed to be listening to a sound no one else could hear, a low hum that vibrated in his bones. A small line of cars, expensive black town cars and government vehicles, was beginning to form behind Arthur's sedan. Horns began to beep, muted but impatient. The disruption was drawing attention. Other security personnel were starting to watch, their curiosity piqued by the standoff at the VIP gate. The crowd of onlookers, a mix of uniformed personnel and civilian contractors, began to murmur among themselves. "Did you hear me?" Miller's voice rose, sharpened by the pressure of the waiting VIPs. "Turn the car around." Arthur finally turned his head, his pale blue eyes meeting hers. They were calm, clear, and held a depth that unsettled her. "I was invited," he said. His voice was quiet, raspy with disuse, but steady. Miller let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Invited? By who? The ghost of Christmas past?" She held up the old ID card for her partner to see. A mocking gesture. "Get a load of this, Davis. He says he's an invited colonel." Davis shifted uncomfortably. "Miller, maybe we should just call it in. Let command sort it out." "Command has better things to do than deal with a disoriented civilian," she snapped back, her authority challenged. She leaned down, bringing her face closer to Arthur's open window. The smell of sun-baked asphalt and her cheap floral perfume filled the car. "Sir, I am giving you a lawful order. For the last time, move your vehicle or I will have you removed from it." Arthur's hand, which had been resting on the steering wheel, drifted down to his keys in the ignition. Dangling from the ring was a small, tarnished silver charm in the shape of a retro-futuristic rocket. His thumb began to rub its smooth, worn surface, a small, repetitive motion. It was an absent-minded gesture, but to Miller it was another sign of his senility, another strange tick from a man who was wasting her time. The injustice of the scene hung thick in the air. The young, powerful officer, clad in the crisp uniform of the future, publicly belittling a silent, elderly man. The growing audience, the mounting pressure, the sheer disrespect, it was a spectacle of casual cruelty. Arthur absorbed it all with a stillness that was both unnerving and deeply profound. He had weathered worse storms than this. He had faced down pressures that would have crushed this young officer into dust. So he waited. Miller misinterpreted his silence as defiance. Her patience, already a thin veneer, finally cracked. "That's it. Davis, get on the radio. Report a non-compliant individual at the VIP gate. Possible cognitive issues. We're taking him in." As Davis reached for his radio, Miller's gaze fell again on the keychain Arthur was fiddling with. The little silver rocket seemed to mock her. "What's that? A toy from a cereal box to remind you of the good old days?" she sneered, her voice dripping with scorn. "You need to let go of the past, old-timer. This is the Space Force. We're a little more advanced than whatever it is you think you remember." The world seemed to dissolve for a moment, the harsh sunlight and Miller's sharp voice fading into a distant hum. The worn silver rocket in Arthur's hand grew cold, impossibly cold, and the scent of sanitized, recycled air filled his lungs. He was no longer in his car, but strapped into a cramped, vibrating seat. Through a tiny, thick porthole, he saw it. The impossible, perfect curve of the Earth, a swirl of blue and white suspended in an infinite velvety blackness. A gloved hand belonging to his co-pilot reached over and pressed an identical rocket charm into his palm. "For luck, Art," said the voice in his helmet, tinny and distant. "The world will never know we were here, but we'll know. Bring it home." The memory, a flash of brilliance lasting only a second, receded, leaving Arthur back in the oppressive heat of the California sun. The rocket charm was warm in his hand now, a small anchor to a history that had been deliberately erased. He looked at Officer Miller, and for the first time, a flicker of something, not anger, but a deep, profound sadness showed in his eyes. A short distance away, controlling the flow of traffic into the general parking area, stood Airman First Class Leo Martinez. He was young, just a year out of tech school, but he was a voracious reader of military history. He'd been watching the confrontation at the VIP gate with a growing sense of unease. He saw the old man's car, the officer's aggressive posture, the way the crowd was whispering. It felt wrong. He'd seen Miller in action before. She was known for being abrasive, a stickler for rules who seemed to enjoy wielding her small measure of authority. When she held up the old ID card, trying to shame her partner, Leo was just close enough to catch the name printed on it, Arthur Vance. The name hit him like a physical blow. Vance. Colonel Arthur Vance. It couldn't be. He'd read that name in a declassified journal article he'd found on a restricted network. It was mentioned on a small, dusty plaque in the base's historical wing. A plaque dedicated to the pioneers of Project Argus, a program so secret that most of its records were still sealed or had been destroyed. The project was the stuff of legends, a rumored military space program from the late 1960s that predated the space shuttle, a program that put pilots in orbit on classified missions, testing technologies that were the very bedrock of what the Space Force was today. Most of the pilots listed on that plaque were marked as deceased, but the name Arthur Vance had no such notation. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked from the name on the plaque in his memory to the frail-looking old man being threatened with arrest. It had to be him, and he was being treated like a vagrant. Panic and adrenaline surged through him. Protocol dictated he report this through his chain of command, a process that would take far too long. Miller was about to arrest a living legend. Acting on pure gut-wrenching instinct, Leo pulled out his personal cell phone. His hands were shaking as he scrolled through his contacts. He couldn't call the base commander, but he had the number for his flight chief, Master Sergeant Evans. Evans was a 30-year veteran, a man who respected the old ways. He answered on the second ring, his voice gruff. "Martinez, this better be important. We're 5 minutes from T-30. Sarge." "It is," Leo said, his voice low and urgent. "You are not going to believe what is happening at the VIP gate. Security forces are about to arrest a man, an old man. And, what's that got to do with you, airman?" "Sarge, his name is Arthur Vance. Colonel Arthur Vance," Leo whispered, turning his back to the road so no one could see him. I think he's from Project Argus." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. For a full 5 seconds, Leo thought the call had dropped. Then Master Sergeant Evans's voice came back, stripped of all its earlier annoyance. It was cold, sharp, and deadly serious. "Say that name again, Martinez." "Vance, Sarge. Colonel Arthur Vance. Stay where you are. Do not engage. Do not do anything," Evans commanded, his voice tight with an urgency that terrified Leo. "I'm handling it." The line went dead. Leo looked back toward the VIP gate. Miller and Davis were now opening their doors, moving to physically pull the old man from his car. Time had run out. The cavalry, if it was coming at all, was going to be too late. Inside the launch control center, a cavern of cool blue light and hushed tension, General Theron stood before the main display screen, a constellation of data points tracking the health of the Odyssey 7 rocket. Every person in the room, from the flight director to the engineers at their consoles, was focused with monk-like intensity on the countdown clock. T-29 minutes and holding, a voice announced over the intercom. "All systems are green for final sequence." It was at that precise moment of orchestrated calm that the door to the command deck burst open. Master Sergeant Evans, his face pale and his chest heaving, strode past the junior officers who tried to stop him, making a beeline for the general. He leaned in, ignoring the dozens of eyes that turned to him, and spoke in a low, frantic whisper. "General, my apologies for the interruption, but we have a situation at the Gate 3 VIP checkpoint." Theron didn't take his eyes off the screen. "Handle it, Sergeant. I'm a little busy right now." "Sir," Evans insisted, his voice trembling slightly. "You need to hear this. They're about to arrest a man. Sir, they say his name is Colonel Arthur Vance." The name hung in the air for a moment before it registered. General Theron's entire body went rigid. He turned slowly, his calm, commanding expression dissolving into one of pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at Evans as if the sergeant had just spoken in a foreign language. "What did you just say?" "Vance, sir. Arthur Vance." The general's eyes darted to a framed photograph on the wall, a picture he passed every day. It showed a group of 7 men in silver flight suits, standing in front of a sleek black experimental aircraft. The photo was dated 1969. In the center of the group stood a young man with a confident grin, and the same pale blue eyes that were at that very moment staring down Officer Miller at the gate. A small brass plate on the frame read, "The men of Project Argus, ad astra per aspera. Get me a direct line to Gate 3 Security Command." Theron's voice was a low growl, but it cut through the room like a thunderclap. Every console operator froze, listening. He turned to his aide. "Get my vehicle, and get the escort. All of them. Now." As his aide scrambled to comply, General Theron stared at the photo on the wall, his mind reeling. Arthur Vance. The quietest of the Argus legends. The pilot who flew the longest mission. The one who manually corrected a fatal orbital decay. The man whose entire service record was a ghost, sealed under a level of classification so high that Theron himself had only been read into it a year ago. The president had personally signed the order to declassify parts of his record for the 50th anniversary of his most famous and most secret flight. Theron had invited him personally, sending the invitation to a quiet retirement home in Lompoc. He was supposed to be the guest of honor, a living link to the very origins of their mission, and his security forces were about to put him in handcuffs. A cold fury, purer and more intense than anything he had felt in years, settled over General Theron. Back at the sun-drenched gate, Miller's patience had evaporated into righteous indignation. The lack of an immediate stand-down order from her command only confirmed her assessment. This man was a nobody, a nuisance. She was the authority here, and she would enforce it. "All right, that's enough," she announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. She unclipped the radio from her shoulder. "Dispatch, be advised, subject is non-compliant. We are effecting an escort from the vehicle. We'll need transport and recommend a full medical and psychiatric evaluation." The threat hung in the air, ugly and final. She wasn't just removing him, she was branding him as mentally incompetent, stripping him of his dignity in the most public way possible. This was her final, irrevocable overreach. She and Davis flanked the driver's side door. "Sir, I need you to step out of the car. Place your hands where I can see them," Miller commanded, her hand hovering near the grip of her sidearm. Arthur Vance looked at her, his calm expression finally giving way to a profound weariness. He had spent a lifetime in the shadows, his greatest achievements witnessed only by the stars. He had never asked for recognition, never sought accolades. He had only wanted to come today, to see the culmination of a dream he had helped secretly build, to watch another generation reach for the sky. He slowly reached for the door handle, not in defiance, but in resignation. The fight, it seemed, was over. He would go with them. He would endure this last quiet indignity. It started as a distant sound, a siren that was different from a standard police wail. It was deeper, more insistent, the sound of official importance. Heads turned. The line of VIP cars, which had been growing restless, now fell silent. The sound grew rapidly louder, resolving into a convoy of sleek black SUVs, their grills flashing with red and blue lights. They weren't slowing down for the checkpoint. They drove past the waiting cars, their tires squealing as they pulled to a sudden dramatic halt directly behind Arthur's humble sedan, boxing him in. The doors of the SUVs flew open in unison. Elite Space Force guardians, armed with rifles and clad in tactical gear, emerged, their movements crisp and economical. They didn't move toward Arthur. Instead, they formed a secure perimeter. Facing outward, their stern expressions a clear message to the stunned crowd of onlookers. They were a shield. Officer Miller and her partner froze, their hands half raised, their minds struggling to process the scene. This was a flag officer's escort, a full honor guard. What in God's name was happening? The rear door of the lead SUV opened. General Theron, 4 stars glittering on each of his collar points, emerged. He was the highest-ranking officer on the entire base, a man Miller had only ever seen in official portraits. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. His eyes scanned the scene, the old car, the 2 stunned security officers, the gathering crowd, and then settled on the old man who was just now slowly, painfully, getting to his feet beside his car. Ignoring everyone else as if they were invisible, General Theron strode forward. Each step was heavy with purpose. He walked past Miller without a glance, his gaze locked on Arthur Vance. He came to a halt directly in front of the old man, clicked his heels together with a sound like a rifle shot, and rendered the sharpest, most profound salute of his career. "Colonel Vance," the general's voice boomed, clear and resonant, echoing in the sudden, absolute silence. "Sir, it is an honor to have you here today. My sincerest apologies for the delay." He held the salute, his arm ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on Arthur. The crowd stared, mouths agape. Miller felt the blood drain from her face. "Colonel, sir," Arthur, looking slightly overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events, straightened his stooped shoulders. With a slow, weary grace that spoke of old injuries and a lifetime of discipline, he gave a slight, acknowledging nod of his head, the civilian equivalent of returning the salute. General Theron finally lowered his hand and turned to face the stunned crowd, his expression still grim. His voice, now amplified by the authority of his rank, carried across the entire plaza. "For those of you who do not know," he began, his voice ringing with pride and anger, "the man you see before you is Colonel Arthur Vance. In 1969, while the world watched Apollo, Colonel Vance was piloting the X-27 Stargazer as part of the clandestine Project Argus. He and 6 other men were our nation's first military astronauts, paving the way for everything we do here today. His missions, classified for over 50 years, pushed the boundaries of human endurance and technology." A collective gasp went through the crowd. People began pulling out their phones, no longer to record a confrontation but to bear witness to a moment of living history. On his third and final mission, the general continued, his eyes finding Arthur's. Colonel Vance's vehicle suffered a catastrophic navigational failure in high orbit. Ground control couldn't help him. He was, for all intents and purposes, lost. For 17 hours, using nothing but his own calculations and a view of the stars, he manually piloted his crippled craft through re-entry. The G-forces he endured should have killed him. The heat should have burned him to a cinder. But he brought his ship and its priceless data home. The general paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He did this in total secrecy. There was no parade. There were no medals given in public. He and his fellow pilots were heroes who were ordered to live as ghosts. "The technology you see on that launch pad," he said, pointing a finger toward the gleaming Odyssey 7 rocket, "the navigation systems, the life support, the heat shielding, it was built on the back of his sacrifice, on data he nearly died to retrieve. I personally invited Colonel Vance to be here today. He is not a guest, he is the guest of honor." Having laid bare the truth, General Theron's gaze, now as cold and hard as granite, fell upon Officer Miller. She flinched as if struck. He took a slow step toward her, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his public address. "Officer," he said, the word dripping with ice. "What is your name and rank?" "Officer Miller, sir. Security forces," she stammered, her face ashen. "Officer Miller," the general repeated, letting her name hang in the air like a death sentence. "You stand here today wearing the uniform of the United States Space Force, a service that exists because of men like him. Your duty is to protect this installation, but your higher duty is to honor our heritage. You have failed in both. You looked at a hero, and you saw nothing but an old man. You have disgraced yourself in this uniform." He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The quiet, surgical precision of his words flayed her. Her career, she knew, was over. But before the general could continue, a frail, age-spotted hand came to rest gently on his uniformed arm. It was Arthur. He had shuffled forward, his blue eyes now fixed on the terrified young officer. "General," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly clear and firm. "That's enough." General Theron turned, his expression softening slightly as he looked at the man he idolized. Arthur looked past him, directly at Miller. "The uniform changes," he said, his voice carrying a teacher's gentle authority. "The ranks, the rules, the technology, it all changes. But respect, young lady, that should be constant. You look at people, and you see what you expect to see. Today you expected to see a confused old man, and so you did. The failure is not just yours. It is ours when we forget to teach you who to look for." His words were not an accusation, but a lesson. He offered no condemnation, only a profound, heartbreaking wisdom. As Arthur's hand rested on the general's arm, the little silver rocket on his keychain swung free, catching the light. The glint was like a spark, igniting one last memory. He was standing in a sterile, windowless room. A grim-faced man in a civilian suit, a man whose name he was never told, was debriefing him after his final harrowing flight. "Your mission will be buried, Colonel," the man had said, his voice flat and final. For national security reasons, Project Argus never happened. There will be no parades, no public record. Your service will be a secret you carry to your grave. The man had then pushed a small velvet-lined box across the table. Inside was the silver rocket charm, a small token from a grateful but silent nation, for the man who touched the stars and can never speak of it. He looked from the memory to the real rocket, gleaming in the distance, a testament to a secret he had kept for a lifetime. General Theron personally escorted Colonel Vance past the shamed security guards and the awestruck crowd. He led him not just to the VIP section but to the command chair right beside his own on the observation deck, the highest seat of honor. As the final countdown commenced, the general would lean over and provide quiet commentary, explaining the new technologies, linking them back to the pioneering work Arthur had done 50 years prior. When the Odyssey 7 rocket finally roared to life, shaking the very ground beneath them, Arthur Vance watched, his face illuminated by the brilliant fire, a single tear tracing a path through the deep wrinkles on his cheek. It was a tear of vindication, of closure, of a promise finally fulfilled. The fallout from the incident at Gate 3 was swift and decisive. Officer Miller and her partner Davis were formally reprimanded, but General Theron knew a simple punishment was not enough. The problem was institutional. Within a week, he mandated a new force-wide training program for all security and interacting personnel. It was a course in military heritage, protocol, and the history of the clandestine programs that built the service. Officially, it was called the Heritage and Protocol Initiative. Unofficially, everyone on base called it the Vance Initiative. A few weeks later, Miller was on duty. Though her assignment had changed considerably, she no longer guarded the VIP gate. Instead, she was directing traffic in the sprawling parking lot of the base commissary, a tedious and humbling task. The sun beat down, and the glamour of her uniform felt a world away. She saw him then, Colonel Vance, walking slowly out of the commissary with a small bag of groceries. Her heart leaped into her throat. She could have hidden, pretended she didn't see him. But the general's words, and more so the colonel's quiet grace, had stayed with her. She took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and walked toward him. "Colonel Vance," she said, her voice small. He stopped and turned, his blue eyes regarding her with no hint of malice. "Sir, I wanted to apologize," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "Properly, without any excuses. What I did was wrong. It was disrespectful, and I am truly, deeply sorry." Arthur Vance looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave a slight nod. "Apology accepted, officer." He gestured with his bag. "I was just heading for a cup of coffee. You look like you could use one." Stunned into silence, she could only nod. The two of them, the living legend and the shamed young officer, walked into the small base cafe together. He bought her a coffee and sat with her for 10 minutes, not speaking of the incident but asking about her family, where she was from and why she joined the service. In that quiet, unassuming act of grace, he taught her the final, most important lesson, that true strength isn't in rank or authority, but in humility and the capacity to see the person behind the uniform. The story of Colonel Arthur Vance is a powerful reminder that heroes often walk among us, hidden not by secrecy, but by our own failure to look deeper. Their valor is quiet, their service is unseen, but the legacy they built is the world we inherit. If you were moved by this story of quiet valor, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that honor our unassuming heroes.